In this episode, you cannot use a 100mm lens for daily photography and documentation. Documentation is about what is actually present in front of you, and distortion is not the best thing to have in documentation. So when I try to focus on a subject, the lens increases or decreases in length. So I obviously do not want the headache of buying another adapter for. So quite a lot of people come back to me and ask me whether they can use the 55-50 lens for dental photography. You're listening to the Dental Photography School podcast, where I'll be sharing practical tips on clinical and general photography. I'm Dr. Mayur Dauda, and I've been coaching dentists and dermatologists on clinical photography since 2013. If you don't want to miss out on any action, make sure to subscribe to my show because I release an episode every Saturday morning. In our previous episode, we discussed about which is the best lens for dental photography. In this episode, I'll be speaking about a couple of lenses which I did not have a great experience with. It might help a couple of people who are probably looking forward to buy a lens for themselves for documentation. The first tip over here that I would want to give is do not go for zoom lenses, because zoom lenses can never be macro lenses. We've already discussed in our previous episode that the 100mm macro lens is the best lens for dental photography. So quite a lot of people come back to me and ask me whether they can use the 55-50 lens for dental photography or the 18-135 lens for dental photography, because it does have 100 in between. But please understand that these lenses with two numbers, that's one 55-50, for example. 55 is the lower focal length and 250 is the higher focal length. You cannot use this lens for dental photography because this is not a macro lens, and remember, we need a macro lens for dental photography and documentation. Just because you have 100 in between 55-50 lens, it does not mean that you can use this lens for dental photography and documentation, and neither can you use 75-300 or 18-135 lens for dental photography or any other form of clinical photography like dermatology photography, because you might have to stand really far. In that particular case, the flash won't reach the subject quite adequately. The next is, a lot of people ask me if they can use the 18-55 lens with macro filters. To be very honest, if you want to forcibly use something, you can always use it. But it's going to give you bad results with respect to your standardization, with the consecutiveness of your photography. Because if you use an 18-55 with macro filters on it for macro photography or dental photography, how are you going to get consistency with respect to the distance from your subject? Because that's only possible with the macro lens. So again, although you can do a little bit of macro photography with 18-55, I would suggest my listeners not to get carried away by this. Saving money on the lens is not really a great option. So 18-55 with macro filters is again not a great choice for dental photography and documentation. Again, even lens reversal technique for dental photography is not really a great option for documenting your cases, because you need to standardize your distance from the subject, and that's only possible if you're using a macro lens which has magnification ratios written on it. Coming to the next lens, you cannot use a 100mm lens for dental photography and documentation. So you need to understand that 100mm lens is not the same as a 100mm macro lens. You have to specify a macro when you purchase the lens for dental photography and documentation. If you're not really sure of it, just consult an expert, and I'm sure they might be really willing or looking forward to help you with this. But Do not buy a 100mm lens, because a 100mm lens does not necessarily mean it's a macro lens. You have to buy a 100mm macro lens only. Coming to the next point, a lot of buzz is there about 60mm macro lens, but I have used the 60mm macro lens in my trip to Chandigarh. So when I compared the results of the 60mm macro lens with my 100mm macro lens, I did realize that the 60mm lens gives prettier pictures, but it has a huge amount of distortion, particularly at a high magnification ratio. For people who are wanting to avoid distortion, 60mm is not a great choice. And you need to understand that documentation is about what is actually present in front of you, and distortion is not the best thing to have in documentation. So I would definitely not go for a 60mm macro lens for dental photography. However, people who document larger areas of the body, for example, dermatologists, sometimes they record the full face or the full limb or the full abdomen or the full back region. In that particular case, 60mm lens is a great choice, because you are going to be standing at quite a far distance, and when you are standing at a far off distance from the subject, the amount of distortion reduces naturally. So 60mm lens is a great choice for dermatologists or an orthopedic surgeon, or somebody who's used to recording larger parts or larger areas of the body, but definitely not a great choice for a dentist. Tamron 90mm lens without VC. Again, I have used the Tamron 90mm lens without vibration control. It's not a great lens for me for a lot of reasons. Number one, it's very plasticky. The build quality is poor. But the thing that really puts me off is that it's an externally focusing lens. So when I try to focus on a subject, the lens increases or decreases in length, which is something that I particularly am not fond of. And I would steer away from the Tamron 90mm lens without VC, and it's not a great choice for me, and I would definitely not recommend that to my listeners. Now, another reason why I would not suggest the Tamron 90mm lens without VC or without vibration control is it has a 55mm adapter. Now, usually the ring flashes that you buy, especially the third-party ring flashes, they are usually not going to give you an adapter that's 55mm. So either you'll have to buy a step up adapter that will convert your 55mm diameter to a 58mm diameter, and then probably you could use a ring flash or a twin flash on them. So I obviously do not want the headache of buying another adapter for my lens that would enable my lens to accept a ring flash or a twin flash. So I'm not a big fan of the Tamron 90mm lens without VC. Now coming to the Tamron 90mm lens with a VC or vibration control, or it's the same as image stabilization, I'm again not a big fan of this one, because because it has image stabilization or vibration reduction, whatever you want to call it, or vibration control. It's a pretty expensive lens, and that's actually does not matter me more. What really matters me is the weight of the lens. It becomes very heavy to use, and definitely I would not recommend it to any clinicians, especially dentists, because we often use one hand to document our cases. IS lenses or VR lenses or vibration control lenses, they become very, very heavy for using in dental photography. Coming to the Sony 90mm macro lens, again, I have used this lens in my trip to Cochin Implant Institute at Dr. Jaybin George's clinic. It's a great lens, no doubt about it. But again, it's a lens with image stabilization. So that makes the lens an extremely heavy lens to use. And I would not recommend any of my listeners to invest on this lens, because it's expensive, yes. But the thing that really puts me off is the weight of the lens. It's very, very heavy to use. The Tokina 100mm lens without image stabilization, again, when I had used it quite a lot of years back, it was an externally focusing lens, so I would definitely not suggest this lens. However, there is a new lens by Tokina which has come into the market, and the lens is Tokina 100mm ATX Mundi SE. which is a special lens for dental photography, it seems, and it's by one of my friends, that's Miladinov Melos, who is a great dental photography teacher. So he has, in association with Tokina, got about this lens for dental photography and documentation. So I do not have a lot of information on this lens, but I am definitely looking forward to use this lens sometime in future to test it probably to use it. But one thing I know for sure about this is it's for $595 US. That's 44,625 rupees, which is pretty expensive as compared to a Canon lens or a Nikon 85mm macro lens. I do not have details about the weight or focusing, whether it's an internally focusing lens or an externally focusing lens. So I cannot comment on that, or the quality of the lens, or even if it's with image stabilization or without image stabilization. But in my opinion, I think considering the cost, that's 44,625. I'm quite sure that it's going to be a lens with the vibration control. But I'm pretty excited about this lens. That's the Tokina 100mm ATX1 DSE lens for dental photography and documentation by Miladinov Melos from Romania. So that's about this episode. I'm hopeful that these episodes are helping you. If you are happy with the episodes, please do comment on the podcast, and I'll be looking forward to see you in the next episode. That's all we have time for in this episode. If you are getting benefited from my tips, do show your love by leaving a rating and a review. For tutorials on photography, do check out my channel Dental Photography School on YouTube. To participate in contests and live events, join the Dental Photography School Facebook and Telegram group. You can follow me on Instagram as Mayur_EOS Maestro or Dental Photography School. I'll meet you next week. Till then, keep listening, keep sharing.